Today I will be sharing my opinion on what the top 10 best hamster cages or enclosures are. Number 10 is the Savic Plaza. The Savic Plaza has the dimensions of 118 by 64 by 52 centimetres. And now for the pros and cons of the Savic Plaza enclosure. The first pro is that it is over the minimum, which means it fits all of the necessary requirements for a hamster. One con of the Savic Plaza enclosure is that the base is low, meaning that you cannot fit enough bedding in for your hamster to burrow. Another con of this enclosure is that it is a barred cage, which means bar chewing and bar climbing can still occur, even if you have all of the enrichment and necessary requirements that you need in this enclosure. Some hamsters simply just cannot be put in a barred enclosure. What could you do to fix these cons? Because the base of this enclosure is low, you can add cardboard or plexiglass to cover the bars so you are able to add more bedding in your enclosure. You can also have a look on Etsy for people that sell acrylic sides that you can replace the bars on your Savic Plaza with. Number 9 is the Furplast Maxi Duna Multi. This Furplast enclosure is 99 by 51.5 by 36 centimetres. Now for the pros and cons of this enclosure. The first pro of this enclosure is that it meets the minimum, which means all of the necessary requirements can fit inside. Because of the build of this enclosure, it allows bedding depth, as well as being easy to clean out. The first con of this enclosure is that it is only the minimum size requirement. This means you may not be able to fit everything that you want and all the enrichment that you want in there, but it does fit the minimum requirements. Another con is that it is quite expensive for what you get. You get the minimum requirement size cage, but it is £135. So for many people it is not in their budget range and is very expensive and not affordable. Number 8 is the Buck Estate Enclosure. The Buck Estate Enclosure is 100 by 50 by 52 centimetres and comes in the colours black and white. The pros of the Buck Estate Enclosure include: it meets the minimum, which means all of the necessary requirements fit inside the enclosure. It also allows a lot of bedding depth, as well as it being an aquarium type enclosure, which means there is no chance of bar biting or bar climbing. This type of enclosure is also stackable, so it's good for if you are a fosterer. You can stack these enclosures on top of each other and still have easy access with the door at the front. Now for the cons of this enclosure include: the enclosure is very expensive and on the pricey side, which means for many it is not affordable. Number 7, we have the first type of DIY Ikea Linmon enclosure. This enclosure is 100 by 56.6 by 46.6 centimetres. The pros of this enclosure are that it meets the minimum, so all of the necessary requirements fit in. It is not too pricey and may be affordable to many people. However, you will need to build it yourself, which many people may not like or cannot do. Another con is that it is made from wood and some hamsters may chew their way out if they are stressed. Number 6, we have the Ikea Detto. The Ikea Detto can be used as a hamster enclosure when flipped on its back and is 163 by 43 by 37 centimetres. The pros of the Ikea Detto is that it meets the minimum so that all the necessary requirements can fit inside. However, it is quite narrow and short, which means not as much bedding as you would like can fit in there, as well as you may not be able to fit some pieces of accessories in there that you would like. You will need to build or buy a lid from a small business, as it is sold as shelves, not a hamster enclosure. And lastly, this enclosure is only suitable for dwarf hamsters, as Syrians find it too narrow and will stress as they find it too small of an enclosure. Number 5 is the Hexagonal Paw Hut enclosure. The Hexagonal Paw Hut enclosure has some funny dimensions that I will leave on the screen because they are not exact. The pros of this enclosure is that it exceeds the minimum, so you can fit all of the necessary requirements in and more, and it also allows a lot of bedding depth. However, it is an awkward shape, so you may not be able to put certain things that you would like in the enclosure because of the awkward shape, as well as you will have to put it together and build it by yourself, which some people may not mind, but some people would like a ready-made cage. It also might not be in some people's price range and budget. It is around £90, so it is on the cheaper side for these large hamster enclosures, but some people still may not be able to afford it. At number 4, we have the rectangular paw hut. This paw hut enclosure is 115 by 60 by 60 centimetres. The pros for this paw hut enclosure is that it exceeds the minimum, so you can add more than the minimum requirements. It is also rectangular and not an awkward shape like the other paw huts, which means you can fit loads of different types of accessories inside of it without the awkwardness of the shape. The cons of this enclosure is that it is wooden, so your hamster may chew on it. They could also pee on it and it will not be waterproof. Like the other paw hut enclosure, you will have to build and put it together yourself, which some people may not want to do or cannot do. It is also quite on the pricey side. From Amazon it is £100, whereas some places sell it for less or more. What can you do to fix these cons? Because the enclosure is wooden, you can coat it with either Plasticoat or Mod Podge. By coating the enclosure with one of these, it will make sure that the enclosure is waterproof in case your hamster pees on it. Number 3 is the second type of DIY Ikea Linmon. This enclosure is 100 by 100 by 60 centimetres. The pros of this enclosure is that it exceeds the minimum by a lot and will fit more than the necessary requirements. The cons for this enclosure, however, is that you will need to build it by yourself from scratch. It is a complete DIY enclosure, as well as it being quite pricey. It will be over £100, maybe around £150 to £200 just for the enclosure itself. At number 2, we have the DIY Ikea Plaster or the Ikea Packs. Both the Ikea Plaster and Ikea Packs are for storage in your home. They are a kind of cupboard sort of thing. But again, like the Ikea Detto, by turning them on their sides and building a lid, you can use them as a hamster enclosure. Both the Ikea Plaster and Ikea Packs come in multiple different sizes, so check out their website to find a size that matches your preference. The pros for these enclosures, depending on which size you get, is that they over exceed the minimum and fit more than the minimum of the necessary requirements needed for a hamster. They allow great bedding depth and are quite affordable depending on what size you get. The cons for these enclosures are that you have to build them by yourself. As I've said, some people may not want to do this or cannot do this, as well as they take up a lot of space, but hopefully with getting a hamster you are looking at this anyway, so it shouldn't really be a problem. And first, in number 1, we have any type of DIY enclosure. By building a DIY enclosure, this means you can have it whatever size and whatever price range you want. You can make it whatever size, shape, you can make it acrylic, glass, wood, any type of material that you want, as well as however tall you want, so you can add as much bedding as you want. You can make it as long as you want, as short as you want, as narrow as you want. You could make it specific for your hamster and your hamster's needs. And overall, DIY enclosures are just, in my opinion, better than store-bought or other enclosures. That is all for today's video on the top 10 best enclosures in my opinion. I hope this helps anyone looking to upgrade their hamster enclosure or get a hamster enclosure for a hamster. Most of these enclosures can also be used for other small pets like gerbils or mice. But this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed and I will see you again next time.